By the time the first alarm sounded, the machine was already sinking. A $3 million excavator sat tilted at the edge of a marsh, its steel frame groaning as the ground beneath it gave way. What was supposed to be solid earth had turned into a slow, swallowing trap. Engineers stood frozen, radios crackling in their hands, watching thousands of dollars disappear with every inch the machine sank. Someone shouted for cables. Another called for heavier equipment. Orders flew, but nothing changed the reality in front of them. The excavator dropped again, slower this time, like the earth itself had decided to claim it. The project manager felt it instantly, not just the loss of the machine, but the weight of delay, reputation, and money slipping away. Every passing minute tightened the pressure. This wasn't just equipment anymore. It was a test. And standing there, surrounded by experts with answers that weren't working, one question quietly took over every mind. What do you do when everything that should work doesn't? And the ground keeps pulling you deeper. Anyway, now, they didn't wait long to act. Within the hour, 2 bulldozers were brought in, massive machines built for brute force, their engines roaring as thick chains were fastened to the excavator's frame. For a moment, it felt like control had returned. Orders were given, signals exchanged, and the drivers pushed forward. The chains tightened, the engine strained, and the ground trembled under the effort. But then something shifted. The bulldozers began to lose grip, their tracks spinning helplessly against the soft surface. The chains snapped loose with a violent crack, forcing everyone to step back. The excavator didn't move, not even an inch. If anything, it sank deeper. They escalated quickly. An industrial winch was brought in next, anchored far beyond the unstable ground. It screamed under pressure, metal stretching to its limits as the line pulled tight. For a brief second, hope flickered again. Then the anchor tore free, ripping out of the earth, as if it had never been secured at all. The force that was supposed to rescue the machine only proved how trapped it really was. By the time a crane was suggested, hesitation had replaced confidence. The operator took one look at the terrain and refused. No amount of money could convince him to risk adding another machine to the swamp. That refusal hit harder than any failure. It wasn't just equipment breaking down anymore. Its expertise is running out. And in the silence that followed, you could feel it settling in, the slow, uncomfortable realization that maybe this problem wasn't going to be solved the way they expected. It was sometime after the crane operator drove away that a different kind of sound reached the edge of the site. Quieter, slower, almost out of place against the tension hanging in the air. An old pickup rolled to a stop near the fence line, dust settling gently behind it. The man who stepped out didn't look like someone who belonged in the middle of a high-stakes recovery operation. His clothes were worn, his movements unhurried, his eyes steady in a way that didn't match the urgency everyone else was feeling. He didn't rush toward the group. He simply stood there for a moment, observing, as if he had been watching long before anyone noticed him. The engineers barely acknowledged him at first. They were too busy replaying failures, scanning for solutions that still made sense. To them, this was a technical problem, one that required better calculations, stronger machines, and more advanced thinking. And yet, this man walked forward without hesitation, as if none of that complexity intimidated him. "I can pull it out," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. For a second, no one responded. Then the laughter came, quick and instinctive. It wasn't cruel at first, just disbelief spilling over. One of the engineers smirked, another shook his head. The project manager let out a short laugh of his own. The kind people use when they think they're being polite, but can't hide what they're really thinking. Because standing there, looking at this quiet, unassuming figure, it was hard to imagine he saw something they didn't. And yet, beneath the laughter, a quieter question began to form. One nobody said out loud. If he wasn't guessing, then what exactly did he know? The laughter didn't seem to bother him. If anything, he looked like he'd heard it before. The quiet kind of reaction that comes when people measure ability by appearances instead of experience. He stepped a little closer, eyes drifting from the stuck machine to the churned-up ground around it, reading the scene in a way that didn't rely on instruments or screens. This wasn't unfamiliar to him. It was just a different version of something he had seen his entire life. He had spent decades working on land that didn't forgive mistakes. Fields that looked solid until they weren't. Soil that could hold weight one moment and swallow it the next. Long before sensors and digital readouts, he had learned to read the ground by feel, by color, by the way it responded under pressure. Back then, machines didn't think for you. You had to understand them, respect them, and sometimes push them beyond what seemed reasonable. "My machine's not like yours," he said, almost as if he were continuing a conversation no one else had started. "It doesn't care about speed." Someone raised an eyebrow, still unconvinced. "Everything cares about power." He shook his head slightly. "Not the way you're thinking." There was a pause, just enough for curiosity to slip in where dismissal had been. "Horsepower tells you how fast something can work," he continued. "But that's not what you need here. You need torque. Slow, steady force. The kind that doesn't spin out when the ground gives way." The words landed differently this time. Not because they were complicated, but because they felt grounded in something real. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was explaining something he had learned. "My engine was built in 1912, he added. "It was made for pulling weight through mud, not racing across dry ground." Now, the laughter didn't come as quickly. It lingered, uncertain, caught somewhere between doubt and interest. Because buried beneath the simplicity of what he was saying was an idea that challenged everything they had relied on so far. And whether they wanted to admit it or not, the possibility had already taken root. It took time before anything changed, just enough for doubt to settle back in. Then, somewhere in the distance, a sound broke through the quiet. It wasn't sharp or mechanical like the machines they were used to. It was deep, rhythmic, almost alive. At first, a few heads turned without understanding why. Then the sound grew louder, accompanied by a faint vibration underfoot, steady and deliberate. Conversations faded. Attention shifted. When it finally came into view, it didn't look like it belonged to this century. The steam engine rolled forward slowly, its massive iron body moving with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to prove itself. Thick wheels turned methodically, biting into the ground with every rotation. Steam drifted upward in soft bursts, catching the light, while the low chuffing sound echoed across the site like a heartbeat from another era. An 01 laugh this time. The scale of it was the first thing that changed the mood. Up close, it didn't feel like an antique. It felt heavy, deliberate, built for a purpose that hadn't been softened by convenience or automation. The polished metal, the exposed mechanics, the absence of anything unnecessary, it all carried a presence that demanded attention. Workers who had been skeptical just minutes earlier stepped closer, not out of confidence, but curiosity. Engineers exchanged glances, their earlier certainty replaced by something quieter, harder to define. It wasn't belief yet, but it wasn't dismissal either, and the old man, still calm, guided the machine into position without urgency, as if he already knew how this would end. The energy at the site had shifted completely. What had started as quiet amusement had turned into focused silence. Because now, for the first time, the question wasn't whether he understood the problem. It was whether they had underestimated the solution. The preparation didn't feel like chaos anymore. It felt like anticipation held under pressure. Thick chains were pulled from the back of the steam engine, their weight dragging slightly against the ground as the old man moved with steady precision. Every link looked older than the machine sitting in the mud, forged steel that had survived decades of use without losing its purpose. He didn't rush. He didn't ask for help. He simply worked as if the outcome were already decided. Behind him, the engineers watched in uneasy silence. No one was laughing now, but doubt hadn't disappeared either. It had just changed shape. Earlier, it was confidence in their own methods. Now, there was uncertainty about whether those methods had been enough. One of them checked the excavator again, as if expecting it to have somehow changed on its own. It hadn't. It still sat half submerged, heavy and unmoving, like a problem refusing to be solved by force alone. The old man walked the chain out toward the stuck machine, each step sinking slightly into the softened ground. He tested the connection once, then again, not because he doubted it, but because experience had taught him to respect weight, tension, and failure. When he finally nodded, it wasn't dramatic. It was final. Someone behind him muttered that this was still a risk, that the ground might give, that the chain might not hold. But he didn't turn around. He had already heard every version of doubt before. "Let me tell you about the next few minutes," he said quietly, almost to himself. As he returned to the steam engine, that one line changed the air again. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't confidence either. It was something else entirely: certainty without explanation. The kind that makes people stop talking, because they realize whatever happens next is already in motion. And for the first time since the excavator had sunk, everyone there understood. They weren't just waiting for a machine to move. They were waiting to see who had been right all along. He didn't look at anyone when he opened the throttle. There was no announcement, no dramatic signal, just a steady movement of his hand and a change in the sound of the machine. The steam engine responded slowly at first, as if gathering itself. Then the rhythm deepened, a heavy, consistent chuffing that seemed to settle into the ground beneath it. The massive wheels began to turn, each rotation deliberate, biting into the earth with a grip that didn't slip or hesitate. For a few seconds, nothing else changed. The excavator remained where it was, half swallowed by the swamp, as if refusing to acknowledge the effort being made. Then the chain tightened, not suddenly, but with growing tension, that everyone could hear before they could see. A low metallic hum spread through the air as steel met resistance. It had been waiting for, and then it moved. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a subtle shift in weight, a small correction in position. But that was enough to break the illusion that it was impossible. The excavator wasn't just stuck anymore. It was being pulled back. Slowly, stubbornly, the mud that had held it for so long began to release its grip. Someone shouted without realizing it. Then another voice followed. The calm that had filled the site broke instantly, replaced by disbelief, turning into movement, into sound, into reaction. The machine crept forward, inch by inch, then foot by foot, as the steam engine kept pulling without hesitation, without doubt. The old man didn't react. He simply adjusted the throttle slightly, maintaining control as if he were guiding something he had done 100 times before. The difference between failure and success wasn't loud to him. It was precise. Behind him, engineers who had spoken in calculations and certainty just minutes earlier were now silent, watching their assumptions unravel in real time. The same machines they had trusted had failed. And yet, this older system, simple and unrefined by modern standards, was doing what none of them could. Then, with one final release of resistance, the excavator broke free completely. Mud fell away in heavy sheets as it rolled onto solid ground. The tension snapped into noise, cheering, shouting, disbelief, all collapsing into the same moment of release. And in the center of it all, the steam engine continued forward one last time before slowing, as if it already knew the job was done. The noise faded more slowly than the moment itself. 1 second, the site was alive with shouting and movement, and the next, it felt like everything had been drained out of the air. The excavator sat safely on solid ground, still dripping with mud, still shaking slightly from what it had just endured. But no one was looking at it anymore. Their eyes had shifted to the steam engine, and to the man standing beside it, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. The engineers didn't speak at first. The same people who had been confident in every calculation, every machine, every modern solution, now stood in quiet disbelief. There was no explanation that felt necessary anymore, because what they had witnessed didn't need one. It simply was. The project manager finally stepped forward, his voice lower than before. The weight of the last few hours was clear in the way he spoke, in the way he avoided unnecessary words. He didn't try to justify anything. He didn't try to defend what had failed. He just acknowledged it. "I was wrong," he said simply. The old man didn't react immediately. He looked at the steam engine, then at the excavator, as if confirming the outcome in his own way. Only then did he nod once. Not in triumph, not in superiority, but in quiet acceptance. There was no celebration from him, no need to prove a point. And somehow that made the moment heavier, because respect didn't come from what he said. It came from what he had already done. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full of meaning, like something had shifted that couldn't be reversed. The excavator stood where modern engineering had failed to keep it. and beside it stood a machine built in a different century, still doing work that no one had expected it to do anymore. No one spoke for a while, because anything said felt smaller than what had just happened. The old man didn't try to explain it further. He didn't need to, but if he had, it would have sounded something like this. Progress isn't always about building something newer. It's about understanding what still works when everything else stops. Because in that moment, it became clear that the problem was never just the machine trapped in the mud. It was the assumption that newer always meant better, and that older meant useless. Yet right in front of them was proof that some knowledge doesn't fade with time. It just gets ignored until it's needed again. And maybe that was the real lesson everyone took away that day. Not that modern tools fail, but that they have limits. And not that old machines are superior, but that they were built on principles that still matter when conditions stop being predictable. As the steam engine slowly cooled, and the last traces of steam disappeared into the air, one thought stayed behind longer than anything else. Some things don't become obsolete. They simply wait for the moment someone is humble enough to remember why they were built in the first place. Years passed, and the story should have faded into memory, reduced to something people only mentioned when they talked about that old rescue in Clayton County. But the swamp didn't change, and neither did the kind of mistakes people made when they believed experience could be replaced entirely by newer machines. It happened again on a humid summer afternoon, almost identical to the first time. A modern excavator, even larger than before, sank into the same unstable ground. Once again, engineers arrived with confidence. Once again, they brought machines that promised more power, more efficiency, more control. And once again, the earth refused to cooperate. For a moment, it felt like history repeating itself in real time. The same frustration, the same silence when solutions stopped working. The same realization is creeping in that numbers on paper didn't always translate to results in the field. But this time, no one laughed when an old truck pulled up at the edge of the site. They already knew what it meant. The steam engine wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a reminder, a lesson that had already been proven once, but needed to be seen again whenever certainty turned into assumption. And as the chain tightened and the old engine began to pull, there was no disbelief left in the air. Only acceptance. Because some stories don't repeat themselves by accident. They repeat themselves so people don't forget.